So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name's Simon Howard. I'm the Director of Standards here at the Architects Registration Board, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. I'm going to be joined, you can see on my screen here, by Hugh Simpson, who's our Chief Executive and Registrar, and also by James Farrer, our Policy Manager. So first of all, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time to engage with this consultation that launched this morning. I know that many of you will be coming from busy practices or learning environments, so we really appreciate it, and we hope it's a good use of your time. A few points of housekeeping just before we begin. You'll see that this session's being run on Zoom, and you'll see a Q&A function if you hover your mouse over the bottom screen. There's also the opportunity to turn on or off closed caption, which dictates kind of the words that we're saying. But there's a Q&A function down there, and you can use that at any point during the presentations to submit questions. We'll keep a log of those here, and we'll come back to as many of those as we can towards the end of the session. So today's webinar is all about the proposal we've published for consultation on professional practical experience, or PPE. The purpose of this session is to explain those proposals clearly, to set out how they've been developed, and to avoid some of the misunderstandings that can arise when changes like this are discussed secondhand. So by way of brief context for those of you who don't know, ARB is the independent statutory regulator for architects under the Architects Act. And one of our core responsibilities is to ensure that only those who are suitably competent are admitted to the register. And we do that in part by accrediting qualifications and setting the requirements around education and training. And the proposals we're discussing today fit firmly within that remit. So they follow the work of the Independent Professional Practical Experience Commission, it's a mouthful, and a substantial period of engagement with learning providers, with employees, and across the sector. So, as I said, the consultation was launched this morning. So we're not here to persuade you of a settled position. We want to explain what we're proposing, why we're proposing it, and to hear informed feedback and challenge on whether we've got this right. So I'm going to hand over now to our Chief Executive, Hugh Simpson, who's going to walk you through the background to the proposals and the first part of what we're consulting on. And then he'll be joined by my colleague, James, to cover the remaining proposals in a little more detail. So Hugh, it's over to you.
Thanks, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. Just waiting for the slides to appear. There you go. And Finn from our team will move them forward. Finn, can you move on to the first slide, please? Thank you very much indeed. So I guess part of the kind of my introduction will be just to run through some of the background to it. So many of you will have been deeply involved both in the original consultation around reform to education and training, but also in relation to this particularly complex and important issue around professional practical experience. I don't want to spend too long around repeating kind of what's described there as the imperative for change. But that's some of the things we'd highlighted initially around why we were reforming and modernising education and training, and just some of those things relate really to the recognition that a society changes, the expectations of the public change, professions change and adapt, technological change, existential changes around climate change, and obviously and not insignificantly fire and life safety design. But that's more broadly in relation to the education reforms as a whole. But one of the things we found in our original consultation on the new learning outcomes and the accreditation framework was that there's one particularly challenging area, and that's in professional practical experience, which has always been a core requirement of registration, but sits outside the regulatory remit. And by that, we mean that professional practical experience is delivered by employers, and we don't regulate employers. And despite the fact that this is one area where the consultation highlighted that was very significant variability, while there was some excellent practice, there was also quite a lot of variability, quite poor practice in some areas. And some of that was down to a kind of range of factors, and some of that we'll cover. But essentially, the imperative around professional practical experience was very much driven by the responses we had to our original consultation. Finn, can you move on to the next slide, please? So as I say, those reforms were intended really to address a number of things. Firstly, the overall competencies, the things that architects should know and be able to do at the point of registration. But one of the things that we also found consistently was that there were many people, many trainees who wanted to access the profession who couldn't. And some of that was because feedback we received was that the framework for education and training was very rigid, but also struggling around access to the necessary experience, which is one of the areas we're focusing on today. And obviously our overall aim is to modernise and reform, but maintain or even increase standards in order to protect the public. So the new framework covers both standards, outcomes, and our approach to accreditation. But as I said, in the original consultation, we've received quite high amounts of feedback that said one area where we hadn't brought forward detailed proposals was around professional practical experience, and that we needed to look at that. As I say, part of the challenge we had was that professional practical experience is delivered by employers, which we don't regulate, and there is no specific government funding or external funding for training. So the Commission was intended to look holistically at things that we could do, recognising that while there are lots of things we can't do, the feeling was that there is lots of things that we could potentially do. So in the following slides, we'll just highlight some of those key findings. So the key themes of the Commission were that there is an opportunity to build more coherence and integration within the framework, so creating stronger alignment and supporting partnership working with learning providers and employers. And as I said earlier, we had lots of feedback, the Commission did, that this exists. It exists in many areas, but it's too variable, and there are areas of poor practice as well as high quality practice. There is lots and lots of evidence around the challenges and poor quality of some of the workplace conditions, particularly in relation to mentoring, induction, support, and quite frankly, employment practices. And I think, again, one of the consistent themes we found was that the people historically have been responsible for driving work experience has been the trainees themselves. And so a kind of real asymmetry of knowledge and power and influence. So the people who are having to do all of this sort of stuff were the people who had the least knowledge and understanding of the system. Learning content. So again, how can the learning and workplace experience combine to ensure relevant content, range of projects, reflection? Again, one of the consistent bits of feedback we had through the initial consultation was that there was quite a lot of variability in relation to what trainees did, both after their part 1, but also during their part 3 training, which had a number of effects. Obviously, the concern about variability of quality and capability, but also for some, it significantly extended the amount of work experience they needed to do in order to be able to confidently take their part 3. Barriers to progression, access to placements, really difficult. Lots of research, particularly evidenced by work that the University of Westminster published and publishes regularly. And I think Alistair Blythe is on the call, which showed, actually quite significant and concerning levels of discrimination and mismatches of work and learning. And also the Commission said that although the ARB does not regulate practices, there are regulatory levers that we really needed to think about how we could use, and we'll come on to talk about some of those in a minute. So Finn, next slide, please. So just a kind of a bit of a summary of both what the PPE Commission did and what we've done subsequently. So PPE Commission carried out engagement across all 4 countries of the UK, geographically, types of practice, different providers. But subsequent to that, we established a reference group really to help us develop a number of things. Firstly, the kind of trainee record of experience, We also had a detailed workshop in Glasgow with a range of practices to make sure we were reflecting the wider UK context. There have been meetings with professional bodies, networks, and others. So in addition to the formal engagement we've had with 18 learning providers and the 3 focus groups and the survey we've had, we've really genuinely tried to think, how can we come forward with a set of proposals that will make things better but are genuinely workable? More detail to follow. Finn, next slide, please. So today we are publishing proposals around these 5 specific areas. So we're updating our standards for learning providers. So anyone who is from a learning provider or associated will understand that alongside the new education reforms, we've updated and provided a set of standards for learning providers, which is then supplemented by an accreditation handbook, which is essentially a guidance document. So we're updating that to set out some updated requirements. But alongside that, we've been working with a reference group and others to think about what guidance, practical guidance, can we provide for employees of trainees and for trainees themselves to understand the different obligations and things that they need to do and should do in coordination with learning providers. We've set out some minimum requirements for a trainee record of experience. So again, I won't go through all the detail on this, and you'll be able to read it in the consultation document itself. But one of the key findings from the PPE Commission was that one of the things that could most effectively support trainees would be having a record of experience. They call it a record of competence. We think it's more accurately described as a record of experience, which they could take through their learning journey. The Commission recommended, we agreed that we should set out what those requirements for a trainee record of experience could be and provide advice on topics and how it might be used. And finally, changes to ARB's registration rules. So as many on the call will be aware, there are some quite simple and basic rules currently in place around, for example, the 2-year requirement. But we think there are some practical things we can update to enable more flexibility, but also some enhanced assurance. Next slide. So under the coordinating role for learning providers, just a kind of a brief overview. Again, many will be aware of this, but for a qualification to be accredited, the standards for learning providers must be met, and each standard is underpinned by a number of measures. So we're setting out requirements that we hope are proportionate at a level that supports trainees. So we're proposing a change to standard 6.2, which covers student support, and in particular, some more guidance in relation to the need to facilitate trainees' acquisition of practice outcomes using an ARB approved trainee record of experience and maintaining a suitable list of employers and advice where trainees have concerns about their employment. It's important to emphasise that this only applies where the trainees are enrolled on an accredited qualification and the practice outcomes are a requirement of that qualification. I think just one thing to highlight from the conversations we had with our reference group, one thing that this does not change is that it is not the learning provider's responsibility to find training or work experience. That's for the individual, that's for the trainee. That does not change. So one of the things we've been working on and hopefully is accurately reflected in the guidance and the consultation document is feedback that we've received that we should be really explicit that while there are responsibilities on learning providers, the responsibility is absolutely on trainees to find their work experience, but there is a responsibility for learning providers to help coordinate that and support them in their journey. Next slide, Finn. This is a final slide from me. So the accreditation handbook supports the standards and provides information about ARB's requirements and processes. So it provides information on what that requirement would be, and that individuals should be provided with the learning providers would need to identify individuals and provide resources to coordinate with employers. the need for them to support trainees to help them find work. But again, just want to emphasize, it's not putting responsibility on learning providers to get the work, but to support trainees in finding them. So it's still the trainee's responsibility. Manage a list of potential employees and reasonable assurance about their suitability, making trainees and employers aware of ARB guidance, advice to trainees about workplaces, learning, providing and using a record of experience, and a recommendation that trainees gain experience within the UK. Hopefully what comes across from this slide is the fact that we've responded to the Commission, which says our responsibility is to find an updated and refreshed way of empowering the trainees and supporting them on their journey, and recognizing that this is essentially a tripartite relationship between the trainee, the learning provider and the employee, and that if we can support each to deliver things that are within their gift and are reasonable, then there's an opportunity to really enhance and improve the consistency of that training. I'll hand over now to James.
Thank you. So the second part of the proposals that we're consulting on is the development of supporting guidance for employers and also guidance for trainees undertaking practical experience. This is something that we heard during our engagement work would be helpful for us to produce and to publish. So the guidance advises on the expectations of both groups during periods of employment. By us producing it, we hope that the burden on providers will be lower because it will already be there for them to share. And we hope as well that it standardizes the information that both trainees and employers will receive across the UK, making things a bit more consistent. So the guidance documents have both been published in full as part of the consultation. So do go and have a look and read and see what you think. But they cover things like the purpose of this period of training and why it's so important and why to make the most of it. It also covers workplace culture, so the role of a practice and working conditions, as well as guidance for trainees on what to do if they do have concerns about those. It also covers mentoring with points on mentors and their role and what they should be doing. It also covers the importance of induction and objective setting and what trainees should be expecting from that as well. It also covers support and supervision, as well as access to senior colleagues when needed and what to expect from that. And then finally, it covers things like feedback and reflection and reviewing of progress. And that role of feedback is really important. And the use of a record, which I'll talk about shortly, covers into that as well. So the guidance highlights the support that trainees can expect, if you go back one, can expect. But at the same time, as Hugh mentioned, it also reiterates their own responsibilities. So, for example, it talks about taking ownership of their own experience and their own development, and that while support is available to them, it's ultimately their responsibility to find employment. It's also clear that while providers can provide advice and help with issues that might arise within employment, they can't necessarily solve those things directly. So that aligns with the coordinating role. And it's clear that it's clear to trainees that providers should be able to help and provide advice or direct them sometimes to other specialist organisations that can assist them, even if it isn't an area in which the provider can intervene directly. The consultation also includes proposals for a new trainee record of experience. So during the Commission's fieldwork, trainees spoke about how recording systems were helpful in tracking their progress and reflecting on it as well. And the Commission thought that these systems could be streamlined and formalised with clear and consistent standards that would help their trainees to do that. The proposed changes to the standards and the handbook that we published today include that learning providers should use an ARB approved record to individually advise trainees on their progress. We propose to set minimum requirements for that record, and these are the minimums that it would need to meet for us to approve its use by learning providers. The record will be a tracking tool for trainees to log their experience. It will help them, their providers and their employers to all understand the experience that they've gained and what they need to do next. It's not intended to be a record of their performance while they're gaining that experience. We, as ARB, also will not be assessing the records at the point of registration. The minimum requirements that we're consulting on are listed in full within the consultation. They are things like that it should map to the practice outcomes that trainees need to meet, that it should be standardized in how it logs, reflects, and how people can corroborate the experience that they're getting. We also want it to be formatted in a way that helps people to demonstrate achievement and to clearly illustrate gaps in their experience that they might have, because we think this kind of thing would really help trainees and others involved in their progress to have an understanding of what they need to do. We also want it to be transferable and usable between different employers or learning providers, because we understand that people move through education in a way that might mean switching between different providers and employers. We also generally want it to be flexible, because one of the aims of our new framework is to be flexible. And so we want to accommodate different routes and different ways in which people reach registration. On top of the minimum requirements, we're also proposing some areas for advice that would accompany the record. These aim to help people to fill it in and to support those who are doing so. So it covers advice on how to do it effectively, case study examples of practical experience to support their practice outcomes, and also just general advice on supporting trainees and with supervision as well. One thing to say on this is that we haven't yet made a decision on what the format of the record should be. For example, whether it's delivered by us or whether it's delivered by another organisation or others and approved by us. This is part of the further development work that we'll need to do, but the proposed requirements that we're consulting on today would be implemented across any format that's eventually chosen. The final area that we're consulting on is changes to our registration rules. So these rules set out our policies and our processes relating to registration, such as how qualified trainees can become registered for the first time. So they're important, and they mean that they can act in setting requirements for practical experience that trainees have to meet before they can register with us. The proposals that we published today include the removal of a requirement that applicants must have at least 2 years of practical experience in order to join the register. This change is made possible because of complementary different improvements that we're talking about today, to the quality of experience that they're gaining and the consistency in which they're doing it. So, for example, the stronger coordinating role for learning providers that Hugh spoke about and the trainee record that I've just mentioned will, we hope, both improve the consistency of good quality experience and reduce the need for that 2-year minimum. It's also really important to be clear here that the standard required to join the register would not be lowered, and trainees would still need to achieve the required competency outcomes. It may mean that some still take longer than 2 years, but it means that they can focus on working towards those outcomes themselves rather than towards a minimum amount of time that they need to reach. It also means that they can do that without having to think about whether the exact kind of work they're doing counts as academia or counts as practice towards a minimum, because with no minimum time, there's nothing to have to worry about counting towards in that way. We also think it will help providers too, because a change of relating to this is that it will help providers who want to combine academic and practical experience because of that. The content of the outcomes also means that we can be assured that trainees who gain their qualifications recently have the current knowledge and experience required to practice safely and effectively from the first day that they join the register. If somebody gained their qualification a longer time ago, we're separately to this consulting on a new approach to those. And when you look through the consultation today, we've highlighted that change and how that relates to this. We know that we've just shared a lot of information with you today and that we've published this morning, but I want to just briefly recap on some of the comments that we've made earlier and our key aim to support trainees. So this tries to illustrate how the different things we've spoken about today support them in different ways. So trainees, we will be issuing new guidance to help them, and there'll be new flexibility for them from the new registration requirements. They'll also get more consistent support through providers and their new coordinating role, and then through employers, who are, of course, a really important part of this as well. The new guidance we've published today would help, as well new guidance that we're also planning for later this year that would cover leadership and mentoring, which are both really important topics. Employers will also, of course, be working closely with providers as part of the new coordinating role, and that combination of working will benefit trainees as well. And then underpinning all of that will be the new trainee record of experience that's acting as a tracking tool, helping those trainees and those supporting them throughout their progress as well. The consultation also asks you whether you agree that the package of proposals will help trainees to do that and to navigate their progress towards registration. Before we move to answer questions you might have, we wanted to give you an idea of the next steps that you can expect from us across this year. These proposals don't affect our wider transition timeline, but as with the education reforms as a whole, we'll continue to review that and we'll keep you updated if that changes. We'll need to decide an appropriate timeline for transitioning to the new standards and rules as well. And we're proposing that new requirements will be phased in alongside the new accredited qualifications as part of our transition to the new framework. We expect Part 3 qualifications will observe the outgoing PPE requirements and that new ones will observe the new PPE requirements, but we'll need to set a date for that to start. And the consultation asks about this transition as well and asks whether you have any views on our plans. Later this year, we'll also need to make some decisions about the trainee record of experience. That includes its format, and the reference group, which you mentioned that we've set up to help us develop those proposals, will continue its work. We're also planning to publish the upcoming code guidance that I mentioned on leadership and mentoring, which would complement all of these changes too. And so we expect to publish that later in this year, and we would consult when we do. So there's lots still to do, but we hope that today's consultation gives you a good idea of what we're doing, and we're really keen on your views. It's a really big step, and we hope that you'll be able to look through the proposals and to share your views once you've considered them.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Hugh. Right, so we've already got some questions that people have submitted via the Q&A button down at the bottom right-hand side, and we'll endeavour to go through at least some of those. There are some housekeeping issues to start with, certainly in relation to sharing attendee who's attending this meeting. I'm afraid we can't share that. There's also been a request to share the recording and the slides, which we can do. Actually, I think the most useful thing for you to do would be to go onto the ARB homepage, and on that homepage is where all the consultation information is published, which is setting out the proposals in detail, and then also gives you the opportunity to respond to that. In terms of other questions, and I'm going to try and group these, and I'm going to come to you, Hugh, because we've had probably most questions on the role of the coordinating role for the learning providers. Could you tell us a bit more about the learning providers' responsibility to do due diligence on potential employers, how they can maintain a list of potential employers, and ultimately who pays for that as well?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I mean, I think all of my responses will be caveated by tell us in the consultation your thoughts on some of these things. So I think we want to hear both examples of good experience. So I think, as James has alluded to, the Commission found that exactly as we've described is being done by some learning providers and being done well. So the question then is, how do we support uptake across the system? So if I understand, I think there were 2 or 3 parts of the question, Simon. The first is list of employers. So I think as we understand it, and certainly talking to many learning providers, many already have things like that informally. What I want to say specifically is that when you bring in new requirements, so the first questions is about liability, and I think I want to emphasize that this is about supporting trainees. It's not about shifting liability. So clearly there will be different ways of delivering it within different institutions, and I think the consultation also highlights that geographically there may be areas where there are fewer employers in certain areas, in which case the relationship with employers may be very different. So there won't be a one size fits all, and I don't think there's any sense that ARB will be looking to have you publish and share lists, but I think it will be, as we do for learning providers when we're looking at the accreditation and assessment of standards, checking that it is done in some way, shape or form. I think, Simon, you said there's a question about costs and funding. Again, probably something to emphasize, this will only be applicable to those providers who are providing accreditation or are being accredited for qualifications include practice outcomes. And I think the second thing to emphasize is that we do understand that there will be, for some institutions, some additional costs associated with it, but I think our strong feeling based on both the original consultation and the engagement we've had is that this is an opportunity to significantly enhance the experience and quality of education of trainees, and certainly the findings from both our own consultation and the research, again, don't want to overemphasize Westminster School of Architecture, but the research findings I think are such that it would be really hard to suggest nothing should be done, and I think we've attempted to bring this in. In terms of how much that will cost, well, obviously it is likely to vary from provider, and I think it's obviously clear that some already provide this as part of their experience, and inevitably that would have to be met from within the university's own resources. But again, I think the PPE Commission were able to highlight that it is being done and can be done because many providers are already doing so.
Thank you. James, I'm going to come to you now with some questions about, I'm trying to gather these questions together about the record of experience. And we're getting questions such as, to what degree is ARB responsible for assessing an architect's, a trainee's competence using the record of experience, or does that still remain the responsibility of the learning provider? And where does this leave the RIBA's PEDR scheme?
Thank you. So the first one's quite simple. We won't be assessing the record for registration at all. So anything that's still the responsibility of the learning provider to assess would remain that. We expect that once the record's in place, there might be different approaches to how it's used across different providers, and that's absolutely okay. But yeah, we're not proposing to assess it ourselves. For what it means for the RIBA system, so we haven't made a decision yet on what the format should be. The proposals we published today are for the minimum requirements, and those minimum requirements would be there regardless of what the format is. There's various potential formats that we've mentioned at different points. So one is that we would produce and maintain our own system of some kind that holds the record. Another is that we would approve others to produce their own records, and that we would do things that way. We haven't made a decision on that yet. The reference group is going to be incredibly helpful to us in doing that, but there's also some decisions and some things that we need to weigh up ourselves as well in doing so.
Thanks, James. We've also had some questions, Hugh, about so this is still talking about the traditional route of a level 7 and then a practice qualification, but what news is there, if any, on a single point of registration, a single examination of competence, and that would be able to capture people who haven't gone through the traditional qualifications?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I'm going to just also pick up on something a couple of comments have made. It relates to the question you just asked, is that RIBA have been part of the reference group, and absolutely we're taking into account the things that have worked well with the PEDR. And I think RIBA have been very public about the fact that they're currently reviewing their own PEDR and have updated it. So absolutely we're working with them to understand how that might integrate with our system. There's a couple of questions I think on this topic, and I guess there's something to there's a structural a question around delivery of education, and then there's a question about assessment. So and I think James Campbell's kind of asked a question on this as well. So James's question is, are you intending to examine students at the end of practical training, or do they simply qualify when they complete their elements of training? Again, I think probably important to say that this doesn't change the current model whereby it is the learning providers that assess whether trainees have acquired and achieved the outcomes they need as part of a level 7 and masters in England and level 9 in Scotland, and pass the diploma at part 3. What the Commission said, that, and we agree with, is that there is a real opportunity to integrate theory and practice. So we're seeing applications for new courses which integrate or potentially integrate the the Part 3 and the Part 2, or the diploma and the Level 7 qualification. ARB is not seeking to replace that. Essentially, it still remains a model whereby we accredit qualifications necessary for registration. And as most people on the call will know, that for many, that 3-part, an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, and a diploma will remain. But there are institutions who are already innovating, and I think certainly the Commission was clear that learning from vocational educational pedagogy, that integration of theory and practice is a good thing and support. So we want to provide more opportunity for people to innovate, but it's absolutely not mandated. It's an opportunity that the new framework provides. Does that pick up, Simon, the question you're asking?
Yeah, I think it does. While you're unmuted, we've had some more questions about who this applies to when it comes to the practical experience, the PPE regime, in the sense of there will be trainees that go through periods of practical experience when they're not enrolled on a qualification. Those particularly those students, following their Part 1. Will these requirements cover them? And if not, why not?
Okay, so I think this links to a couple of comments that have been made on the Q&A, which I think is really important, which is while we do not regulate employers, so we have to be really careful to not go beyond what our legislative powers are. But I think the PPE Commission highlighted the fact that if we can work effectively with learning providers and employees and their trainees as well, we can help to shift culture. And I think that's it's not an easy thing to do. But absolutely, if we increase the amount of information for trainees, no matter where they are on their journey. So if you've done an undergraduate degree and you can see what the competency outcomes are, you've got more of a sense of what your journey is. So one of the things we hear back regularly from trainees is just a lack of understanding about where they are on their journey, how much of their a practical experience they've achieved, which will be needed to achieve the outcomes they are when they come to registration. So even though it doesn't directly apply to those who are not signed up to an accredited course, I think we hope that what we're doing collectively with learning providers, with employers, through the guidance and the guidance to trainees, will really help to shift an understanding of what professional practical experience is for. And again, goes back to my point I made earlier. There is some additional responsibility on learning providers, but fundamentally what hasn't changed is it still remains the trainee's responsibility to find that work experience. But we're hoping certainly with the guidance, it provides a lot more empowerment and information to help them understand what their rights are as well as their responsibilities.
Thank you. I think that probably covers the broad range of questions that we've had. I think it's also fair to say that a lot of the people asking questions are asking for a lot more detailed information. And I think it would be really useful if, once you've read the proposals in detail, if there is further guidance you think that you're going to need, either whether it be you're a learning provider or a trainee or an employee that's employing trainees as part of the experience, to tell us as part of that consultation. So the consultation is more than simply saying I agree or I don't agree. Is what more information, what more assistance do you think that you need in order to make this workable and successful? And we'd be really interesting to hear your comments and questions and views as part of that consultation. I think it leaves me to particularly thank all of those who've been involved we've engaged with on this journey so far. RIBA and RAS, the professional bodies, those members of the reference group, all the learning providers that we've both spoken to directly, and the commission. The members of the commission, who I should also thank, have spoken to during this process. And as I said at the start of this is not a done deal by any means. These are the proposals we think will work, but we're really keen to hear from those, particularly those people whose job it is to implement them, to explain to us what we've missed and how we might be able to improve them. So that being said, Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And yeah, like I say, I hope that you can respond to the consultation. We'd be really useful to hear what you've got to say. If you've got time, also you'll have seen that a poll has just appeared on your screen. It's always useful. It's always helpful for us to know whether these sessions are useful to you or not. And if they are, quite clearly, then this is a really good way of communicating our policies with you. So thank you very much for your time, and yeah, have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.